everyone, I'm Sherry, and very happy to host this session today. So I'm a second year PhD student in the School of Education, and I'm very happy to introduce to you our speaker today, Giorgia. Giorgia is a second year PhD researcher from the School of Education, and I'm sure many of you have already known her. She's going to talk about her project focused on personal experiences, challenges, and coping strategies of a UK student of Italian during the year abroad in Italy, especially in light of the outbreak of COVID-19. And the talk will last for around 25 minutes, and then Gary, Martin, and I will give a 3-minute response each. We'll have some time for questions after that. And it will be helpful if we do not use the chat facility or raise questions until Giorgia has finished speaking, as it may distract her from her talk. So that's it. Are you ready, Giorgia?
Yes, born ready. Thank you. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Sherry. Just as a heads up, this presentation will be based and focused on my data and my preliminary interpretation of it. For this presentation, I will focus on the unexpected turns of a year abroad in Italy in this era of COVID-19. So just to give you a quick overview, I'll tell you more about my project in general, telling you about my plans before the outbreak of COVID-19 and what my plans are now and how they have changed. I will also focus on one specific case, one participant, participant 2, so that P2 that you see. I know I've got great creativity, so P2. And I will give you some background information about her, especially focusing on her before the COVID-19 outbreak. Now, the main course, and I'm using this word on purpose, the main course of the presentation will be a visual journey through P2's experiences in her year abroad so far, with particular focus on what happened after the lockdown started. In the conclusion, I will address again the question about nightmare or dream and give you some of my interpretations about the data. Now, let's dive in. My project. So I will not give you too many details about this, but I'm carrying out a qualitative longitudinal case study about, of course, students, UK students in particular, of Italian during their year abroad. And as Sherry said in the introduction, I'm looking at their perceptions, their experiences, and with particular attention to their prior beliefs, so their beliefs before they left the UK to go on their year abroad, and how these beliefs impacted their experiences. Beliefs, I'm talking in general, but they are specifically about beliefs and thoughts about Italian culture, Italians, Italy as a country, so a bit in general. And in particular, during their year abroad, I'm interested to know what affective challenges the students face and how they cope with them. And finally, also how their pre-departure beliefs are related to the way they cope with such challenges. Now, I'm quite lucky that my questions are still quite valid despite all this pandemic thing. So they are to be confirmed, but I'm quite happy to still use them as guidelines for my data collection. Now, about my participants, I would have loved to have 4, 5, even 6 participants. I mean, even 8 would have been great. But unfortunately, it's all on a volunteer basis. So only 2 people decided to participate in my project. But that's more than enough for a qualitative longitudinal case study with deep and rich data. Now, P1 and P2, my participants, have similarities and differences. So on the one hand, they're both going to Italy. Well, they both went on their year abroad as teaching assistants, so not as students as I had planned at the beginning, but they were the only ones that volunteered. So it was still very interesting to see that they were the only ones to take part in the project. And they were both beginner students, so ab initio students. So they had never studied Italian until they got to university, so 2 years before their year abroad. Now, they're also quite different, though, because they had very different previous experiences abroad and different pre-departure beliefs. Just to give you one example on this, basically, P1 studies another language as well. So before her year abroad in Italy, she had already been for 4 months in another country, and she had already experienced a study abroad period. While on the other hand, P2 is only studying Italian, so she had not had any previous study abroad experience, but she had been to Italy many times, whilst P1 had barely gone, like, you know, to Venice for 1 day, these kind of things. So P2 had a much bigger experience of Italy, but not of the study abroad. And so this made them have different beliefs and expectations. So with the COVID-19 outbreak, P1 left Italy and went back home, and with the intentions of coming back. So she came back just to stay at home while the schools were closed, but she had planned to go back. Of course, when the lockdown started, she was kind of locked out of Italy. P2, on the other hand, decided to stay in Italy, and so she has lived the whole pandemic, well, since Christmas, basically, since the 1st of January, the first days of January, she has been in Italy. So she's lived all the pandemic, all the lockdown there. For this reason, I've got much more data about P2, and in this presentation, I will focus on her. By the way, P2 and P1 are both females. I will not talk about data collection methods, and I hope you can see the bottom of my screen, although maybe not. But anyway, I'll talk you through. I will not talk about data collection in much detail, but basically I had to change my plans. So my idea of having interviews at different stages and at the end of the year abroad kind of had to change. However, P2 was very willing to and very happy to create with me a kind of journal of this experience. So we've now started to almost meet, well, video call weekly, or kind of almost weekly. So we are creating a pandemic journal, a year abroad journal, including pictures, which is what we're going to use today. So just to give you a bit more background about P2. Now, as I said, she had already been to Italy many times, and in our first interview in September, she said that her initial aim was to become Italian, to become a local, and she told me also that she had always dreamed of becoming an Italian chef. That's her childhood dream. In particular, she dreamed of making orecchiette, which is a kind of pasta, just so everybody knows. So she was very focused on becoming Italian, and Italy has always been her kind of obsession, to be fair, but her favorite country, favorite things. She wears only Italian clothes, basically very focused. Now, when she arrived for the first 2 months, she changed accommodation 3 times until an Italian family offered to host her, basically. So she moved in with an Italian family. Now, this led to contrasting feelings. So on the one hand, she was really happy to be surrounded by an Italian family, so Italian people. But at the same time, after 2 months of independence and freedom in Italy, she was kind of forced to stick to their routine. She had to adjust to their commitments. She had to join them in all their commitments. So a bit of contrasting feelings and mixed feelings here. But particularly, and we'll see it through the rest of the presentation, her identity was really kind of at stake throughout her year abroad, because, okay, this lack of independence with the family started, but she also started feeling like they were treating her like a child, which she was not. And that really impacted on her feeling herself. as well as she, despite being surrounded by people, being surrounded by the family, by all the people at school, in our conversation, she referred very often to her feeling of loneliness, despite being with people. And this was also part and due to her feeling of inability to communicate. So that's not unusual for a year abroad, but the fact that she thought that her Italian was horrible made her feel less herself. She particularly referred to the fact that without banter, she was not herself. So not only just communicating, but she was actually missing the banter, the small talk, all that things. She was really kind of isolating. Right, now that you have a clearer picture of P2 before lockdown, before COVID, I'd like to introduce you to take you through her journey, to a journey of her experiences. And I have to say, I will use a few pictures of food. So I'm sorry if it's lunchtime, but resist. It's almost there. We're almost there. Plus, it's Italian food, so it's going to make you ready for build up an appetite for lunch later. So let's start. And yes, if you don't recognize them, those are orecchiette. So, you know, we've already said it, she has always wanted to be an Italian chef. And in the first interview, she mentioned her dream to make orecchiette. Well, within the first 2 weeks of lockdown, she fulfilled her dream. Now, as fantastic as this sounds, however, making orecchiette for her was actually a coping strategy against loneliness and homesickness. So with lockdown, she was forced to be 24/7 in the house with the family, but it wasn't her family. And as well, everybody was either online teaching or doing lessons online as students. So the two children who are a bit younger than her. But basically, everybody was on the computer in their room, isolated. So she felt lonely, isolated, whilst under the same roof with other 4 people. At the same time, she realized how different it was from her UK family and being at home in her house. And the fact that when she's at home in the UK, she relies on other people to be there for her. And if she's bored, she can just go to one of her brothers or parents and she can just stay with them. Here it was all different. And also she couldn't just go out for a walk or she couldn't take the car and go. And while at home, she could just decide if she wanted to bake something or to cook something. Here, she even while doing orecchiette, she had to ask for permission and for like where the tools are. And that's why I refer at the bottom, I don't know if you can see it, but I wrote independence-ish in brackets. However, this coping strategy was actually, I think, a turning point for her because she, after 2 weeks of kind of bottling up all her feelings, she decided to do something practical and with a purpose. That's what she said about orecchiette, and to do something for her. So I think at this point, she started to renegotiate her identity, going back to the familiar, so making food, which is what she was used to, but including this in her new environment, so combining this with something new. Now, new picture. This is the only picture that doesn't relate to food, just so you know. This picture represents probably a scene that we have all experienced in these days. And she took it at the very beginning of lockdown, the first time she went out for food shopping. And she went out alone, as we know, it's the guidelines. And she described this as being a very tense atmosphere, tense moment, not the usual Italy. And she also said that people all looked and were a bit scared, which is understandable, and I think we have all experienced this. However, we have described and commented these pictures around mid-May. So the lockdown in Italy had already been there for, well, a few months. So at that point, in hindsight, she was able to say, well, you know, that was scary, but it's not scary anymore. And everything that seemed weird and unusual started to be familiar. So they got used to, for example, disinfecting products after going food shopping. And focusing more on the positive sides of lockdown, there we go with another food picture. I hope you can all see the pizza, so I'm not the only one getting hungry. Now, P2 described pizza night as the best part of the week. But what's more important than this is that with the lockdown, and of course she was forced to spend more time with the family. But with time and by trying to work on her confidence, she managed to suggest making pizza. And when she saw that the family was absolutely happy with making pizza, I mean, who wouldn't, to be fair, she managed to build the courage to suggest more. For example, in this case, she suggested to make it a tradition and a routine. So in that family now, every Saturday, they have a pizza night, which sounds great, and it is great. But it is not only like an established routine that make lockdown feel less of a weird experience, and it made her feel more settled. But I think this was also one moment in which she really redefined her identity and managed to find her place and her role within the family. So she was not waiting for the family members to make decisions, to take the initiatives. She started to take the initiative and reclaimed her independence, or her own self. Now, more food, I told you. So this is actually a picture from before lockdown. This comes from mid-November, end of November. And from the picture you can see probably it's from Rome, because P2 went to Rome for a British Council course. She is a teaching assistant with the British Council, so she had to go for a course, to do a course in Rome. And by pure chance, absolutely pure chance, I was there while she was there, because I'm from Rome, so I was just visiting. And with very short notice, we managed to meet. Now, when we were there, she told me how this course was going, and she felt a bit better than the other students. She could understand more than what they seemed to be understanding. And when she took this picture, she was actually sitting next to a group of Americans that could not speak a word of Italian apart from grazie and, you know, the usual things. And so she said, in that moment, oh my God, I felt like I'm an expert. However, this is, I think, the importance of hindsight, because when we were actually there, her idea was still, my Italian is horrible. And when I told her that if she wanted, she could speak to me in Italian, she absolutely refused. And she said, I'm not confident. No, I'm better than them, but my Italian is horrible. I don't want to speak it. So my Italian is horrible from there changed, because in mid-May, when she described this picture, she actually said, ooh, my Italian isn't as bad as I thought. And she said that in Italian. So all these pictures that I'm presenting here were described to me in Italian. So we spoke for 2 hours, 90% in Italian, and she was absolutely fantastic. So her Italian is definitely not horrible, but the fact that she realized that her Italian is not as bad as she thought was a great step. Seems small, but it's a great step for her. So I think it's all interesting to see how hindsight, her perspective changed from when she was actually there, she didn't think she was that great. And now thinking back, she actually thought, oh, maybe I wasn't as bad as I thought in that situation. I have to say that her language confidence also built thanks to the lockdown, because due to, well, being forced to stay at home, she had more time, okay, to study, although that's not her favorite thing. She listened to more Italian music. She really made some effort to find some private lessons online and even asked me to speak in Italian. So it was her initiative again. But also with her Italian mom, as she calls her, she's adapted a card game so that every day they play this card game with vocabulary, Italian and English vocabulary. So every single day they practice their vocabulary together. Now, apart from building confidence, this also made her see all the positive sides of this pandemic. And with time, she started to feel more part of the family and more grateful for this opportunity that they gave her when they offered to host her. Now, this final picture is about some sweets from typical of the region in which she is staying. And of course, it's the last picture, it's the last image we have, and I couldn't not finish with a dessert. But this also represents a moment in which her relationship with the Italian mom and with the family in general, but especially with the Italian mom, grew even stronger, because the Italian mom made these sweets one night by pure chance, just because they had the ingredients, and gave them out for breakfast the next morning. However, the next morning turned out to be English Mother's Day. And when P2 told her, well, they had an emotional hug, an emotional moment. I will not delve too much in that. But basically, they represent a moment in which P2 really felt like she was one member of the family. Apart from the fact that she's in the group chat they have for the family, which I always thought was fantastic. One last point on this is that by this point, after 2 hours of talking about this, P2 actually acknowledged her progress openly and said, if I hadn't lived with them, I don't know where I would be now. And probably I wouldn't be this good in Italian, or I wouldn't feel this confident speaking Italian. And I would probably be in the UK, not here. So really acknowledging all her developments and all her progress. Now, this is the end of our journey. I have one more slide and one more minute. So going back to our question from the beginning, is it a nightmare or a dream, this year abroad during COVID-19? It actually rhymes. Well, I personally would tend to put it more towards a dream. It might not be neither, but I think if I had to choose, I would probably go for a more positive outlook at it. Now, to conclude, I would actually like to share with you an idea that I got while I was creating these slides. So it's very recent, from the weekend, and it's my idea, my take on the effects that lockdown may have on people, not just on P2, and not just for year abroad students. It could be more of a general kind of framework, hypothesis, idea. But again, it's just a thought. It may already be there in the literature with a different name, or I don't know, maybe silly, but still, it makes sense to me and I like it. So I'll share it with you. And basically, my idea is that there is a sort of lockdown pressure cooker effect. And I thought about this while thinking of how P2 managed the lockdown and how I personally perceived her journey. So at the beginning, when she was forced to be in the house with the family 24/7, it felt like, okay, the pressure cooker lid is on and locked and it's closed and you can't really take anything out. And the fact that she was feeling alone and lonely and she had no time for herself, she couldn't go out like to refresh. In some occasion, I actually felt like she would explode. So, you know, pressure cooker, they can be dangerous in some cases. And to be fair, I personally probably would have exploded. However, luckily, in P2's case, she managed to use the pressure. Instead of bubbling up till explosion, she bubbled up and managed to use that pressure to reclaim, to find the strength, to find the courage to reclaim her independence, her identity, and find her role in the family. Again, it may be a silly idea, but I like it and it makes sense to me. So,
Giorgia, thank you very much for that beautifully rounded presentation with your lovely illustrations of food. It's not good to salivate when you're trying to watch a presentation, but thank you very much for that. There are a number of things that struck me as I was listening to you, and I'd like to take them one by one if I may, and then I'll close with a question. The first thing was that at the beginning of your talk, you were almost apologetic that you know, you only have 2 participants, P1 and P2. I'm not sure it's appropriate for you to regret not having 6 or 8 participants, because having these 2 and this one in particular has given you the opportunity to go into great depth and learn such interesting things that perhaps you might not otherwise have done.
True.
So that was the first thing that struck me. The second thing that occurred to me was the link between your talk and what Chloe Wallace was talking about yesterday in the scholarship presentation that we had. And there were two aspects of her talk that struck me in particular. She talked about emotional disturbance, the emotional disturbance that you feel when you transition into a context in which you feel unfamiliar. And of course, P2 felt this emotional disturbance when she moved in with the family. I thought it was an interesting analogy you drew with the pressure cooker. I thought that was appropriate, and I can understand how she must have felt at the beginning. But then I wondered whether or not that pressure cooker turned into a greenhouse as she started to feel more comfortable. She was comfortable in her environment. She knew the people around her, and they were giving her the freedom to grow. And indeed, they adopted her, it seems, as one of their own.
Literally, yes.
Yeah. The other interesting thing that struck me was that Chloe Wallace talked about the importance of networks, and you said that even though she was with a family, and a family that were very receptive and warm and all the rest of it, even though she was with them, she still felt lonely. And that made me think, sure, having people around you isn't necessarily a network. You know, you have to develop a particular relationship with them in order to be able to get the benefits of the network. So those were just some of the things that occurred to me as you spoke. My question, Giorgia, if I may come to that, is this. I wondered the extent to which we as tutors can prepare individuals for that emotional disturbance, for that culture shock they're going to experience. I mean, am I right in thinking that it's impossible to prepare them completely, that emotional disturbance is just something that's inevitable, just something that they have to go through? It's just part of the study abroad deal?
Well, yeah, I would agree. In the first interview, actually, with both participants, I did ask how they were prepared from the university for their year abroad, and they both said we weren't. P1 because she had to think about her early study abroad experience, so she had all the exams at once, and she couldn't attend the meetings for like preparing students for the year abroad, while P1, who attended them, didn't feel prepared by them. And she said that actually what prepared her was her personal trip to Italy in advance before her year abroad for 3-4 weeks to improve her language. And that's the only thing that prepared her. But I think even if, well, I'm planning to ask them at the end if there was anything that they would recommend as like potential preparation, or what they would say to their younger selves or their pre-departure selves to be more prepared for the year abroad. But I think to some extent what you said about the emotional disturbance is not something anybody can prepare you. Also because P1 and P2 were different people and they reacted in very different ways. So they both had emotional disturbance, but they had a very different one, well, different feeling. And also, I don't think there will ever be a good way or a possible way to prepare anybody for a pandemic, a bit because
that's right.
nobody knew, but also how do you know what's going to be like? So yeah, I totally agree. I'm not sure there is one perfect way to prepare them, although I think there could be some improvements and some suggestions that could be made, and I will ask both participants to well, give their opinions about what could be done to prepare students a little bit more, a little bit better.
No, I'd just like to thank Giorgia very much again. Like all of us, I think we found a fascinating glimpse of a research project and of just of human experience at a very peculiar time in our history. And it's great that your research is recording this, and going to be fascinating to see how it plays out over the coming months. Yeah, just a couple of points to raise and maybe a couple of questions. I noticed that you said that P2 had quite distinctive motivation, actually, a kind of integrative motivation for doing study abroad. So she wanted to become Italian, and she dress like Italians, and she was cooking, and she really wanted to immerse herself in the culture. And I wonder how important that original motive is in sort of characterizing and even determining perhaps the experiences she had. And of course, I'd love to hear about P1. We don't have time today. I presume, and P1 had slightly different motives. And would those original motives shape her experiences in different ways and her reaction to COVID? So it's just maybe the importance of motives in shaping our experiences. As for the cooking, all the cooking metaphors that ran through, right through to the pressure cooker, it just reminded me of the Lingua Cuisine project. Are you aware of that? I'll type it into I'll type the link in. I just checked it on the web, so I put a link into the chat so that people can follow it up. But it's a project that originated at Newcastle University, Paul Seedhouse and colleagues there. And it became quite a big project with a lot of EU funding. And it was, at its heart was the idea that you learn language best through doing things, so you're using language to do something. And in this case, it was cooking. And it's become a very sophisticated website now where people are preparing, they send in recipes and videos of them actually cooking using the terminology and phrases in the language along with the ingredients, etc. Have a look at it anyway.
I will.
It may have some relevance for you.
Even just the recipes will be good for me.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there. Final point, yeah, I mean, like Gary, I was also very struck with the similarities with Chloe Wallace's talk and culture shock. And it was interesting that her culture shock seemed to kick in. Am I right in thinking it was about 2 to 3 months into her experience of study abroad?
It depends, because again, culture shock is a bit of a controversial term and concept, but I think, the idea of culture shock might have already started from the beginning, because she was a bit trying to figure out things from the beginning. And I didn't mention the teaching aspect, but that was really overwhelming her, or all the teaching and the teachers and her relationship.
I mean, it's often said. Can you hear? Can anyone hear me?
It was a bit scattered. I only heard a couple of.
Yeah, sorry. I likewise for you. Now
Sorry.
I can only see you. I can't see anyone else. But it's often said that culture shock comes after there's a sort of honeymoon period.
Yeah. Which did not happen.
Where everything, because moving to a different culture, to a different country, it is sensory overload. So many things are different. And at first that's exciting. And it's just, you kind of living on the adrenaline of the different. But then it becomes tiring. So, and that is often sort of 6 weeks into the experience. Of course, it's different for different people. Mm-hmm. But then moving to live with a family kind of intensifies the difference as well. And actually, Chloe, often it's the subtle differences that really cause the problem. So being with a family might have kind of felt very familiar in a way, and yet subtly different. And so, the experience becomes even more, the difference and otherness becomes even more intense. But it's great that she's got through it. And, in a way, as Gary was suggesting, these periods of difficulty, of real challenge, maybe that's a part of study abroad. It's a necessary part of learning.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. Really interesting talk, Giorgia. I particularly liked all the food references, which are making me extremely hungry now. But I thought I'm sort of picking up a bit on some points that Martin made and that you've made. I was wondering about what sort of role, or whether you've investigated the place of personality in this. And have you done any sort of evaluation of the participants in terms of what sort of persons they are, personality, and therefore how they're going to react and respond to the year abroad? And sort of connected to that a little bit, family background. I would have thought, particularly in this situation where someone was thrown into being with lockdown in a family setting in Italy, what sort of family backgrounds had the participant experienced at home? So was it a similar family to what she was faced with in Italy, and how far did that sort of affect her ability to sort of cope and sort of settle down? Anyway, there's a couple of points.
Okay.
There. Yeah.
So first of all, personality and how they react to things. So I didn't use any previous schemes or surveys for personality research, just because I wanted to make it more qualitative and more directly talking to them. So I didn't use a specific survey, but I based my questions on the literature also about personality and behavioral aspects. And in the first interview, well, already from the questionnaire, I asked them to talk about previous experiences, expectations, beliefs, previous beliefs about Italy, etc. And in the interview, I also try to go deeper and ask them what would they do if something like this happened. Of course, it was all kind of hypothetical, but it still, I think, gave me more details than just a tick on a survey. And they were actually very different in that respect, because P1 seemed to have a much more kind of realistic expectation of the year abroad. So she knew she was going to have to struggle, or she knew that when this happens or when she has difficulties, she isolates, she closes down, she stops speaking. And because she had already had a study abroad experience, I think, so that's how her background or previous experiences helped her in that. She knew that she didn't want to do that again, because in the first study abroad experience, she closed down, she isolated, she hated it basically. So when I asked her what she would do, how she would react if anything bad or anything struggling, overwhelming would happen, she said, I usually behave like this or react like this, but I'm planning to do this other thing. And she actually did, I have to say. P1 was extremely interesting as well. I could do another talk about her. While P2 had a more kind of idealized idea. And so that was a bit, and also stereotyped vision of Italy. So in that case, it was very interesting to see how she developed. Going back to the family background issue or aspect, I didn't ask specifically, but to be fair, it came out from the conversations, and they both have quite a close relationship with their family. I think in P2's case, what helped was that she had already been to Italy in the past, but not only that, she had already been with a family.
All right.
And it was interesting to reread the transcripts, because in the first interview she said, I'd love to be in a family, but I couldn't arrange it. I don't know how to. I've asked, but they didn't reply my email, so I'm a bit lost. I'm just going to an Airbnb and then find out. That's how she changed 3 times. But the universe, who knows, gave her the family.